Hello, everyone. This is the story so far. In today's video, we're going to be introducing the world of Eberron. This introduction will be brief, covering the highlights of its origins, but if you want to know more, sources will be listed in the description below. Forgive me if my voice sounds a little scratchy. I've been experiencing a little sickness, but we're going to go ahead and get into it. Eberron was originally created as thrilling tales of swords and sorcery by Keith Baker for the Wizard of the Coast fantasy setting search in 2002, which was a sort of sweepstakes meets competition where the winner would win a hefty sum of money alongside getting their setting published by Wizards of the Coast for the 3.5 edition of D&D. This is Keith Baker on the screen right here. After winning the competition, the setting went through several more stages of development before it became the Eberron we know today. In fact, it wasn't even Keith Baker who came up with the name Eberron. That honor goes to a WotC dev named Bill Slavicek. But the important thing is that the setting eventually coalesced around the elements that formed its core identity. Baker's vision for the setting was to blend elements of traditional high fantasy with the genre conventions of pulp, action, adventure, and film noir. The inspirations listed in the Eberron campaign setting sourcebook, released in June of 2004, count 1999's The Mummy, 2003's Pirates of the Caribbean, the 1981 Indiana Jones movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, and 1999's Sleepy Hollow, which all happen to be movies from my childhood. Ouch. Now that we know where the setting comes from and what its inspirations are, let's talk a little bit about what sets the setting apart from the rest. There have been many D&D settings, and I mean many D&D settings. For perspective, the current undisputed champion of the game's settings, the Forgotten Realms, of Baldur's Gate and Drizzt Do'Urden fame, is actually pretty recent as far as settings go, and it isn't even the first most popular. That title goes to Greyhawk, which was a setting published back really early on for the game. If you want to hear more about the Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk, or D&D more broadly, I recommend checking out the YouTube channels of Mr. Rex, Jordan, the PH is silent, or the Mighty Glue Stick, as they talk a lot about the Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk lore, a lot of those sort of things. Over the years, there have been D&D settings with many different aesthetics, but most traffic in some form of medieval high fantasy pulp adventure. Greyhawk and the Forgotten Realms are purely Eurocentric medieval high fantasy. Yes, the settings have largely outgrown this, or in Greyhawk's case, did outgrow it, particularly the Forgotten Realms. But the core identity is what it is. Greyhawk tends to be more Arthurian and somewhat lower magic, but the Forgotten Realms is the fiction baby of the Lord of the Rings to a fault. Very high magic, very medieval, very European, especially Mediterranean. There's aspects of the Forgotten Realms that sort of blend a lot of different other cultures from around the Mediterranean region, but it's got that core identity very set in stone. Beyond these are more experimental settings, such as Dark Sun, which features a sort of dying planet road warrior aesthetic, very grimdark fantasy. Then there's settings like Al-Qadim, Karatur, and Maztica, which started as heavily stereotypical, generalized fantasy adaptations of Arabic, East Asian, and South Central American cultures, respectively. They aren't great. And most of them have kind of been rolled in or even originally published for the Forgotten Realms as a means of expanding that setting scope outside of medieval Eurocentrism. But it wasn't exactly great in the way that these cultures were written and perceived. And I just can't really talk on it more as someone who wasn't really involved with the hobby when these settings were coming out, and I haven't really done a whole lot of research on them. But there they are. They're here for what they're worth. And Eberron wasn't even the first setting to feature post-medieval elements, as Tracy and Laura Hickman's Ravenloft setting was published in 1983 and riffed on Gothic horror more than medieval fantasy. So, what sets Eberron apart? Personally, I think it's more of a sum of its parts situation. Eberron seamlessly integrates D&D's not so trademarked brand of action adventure and high fantasy magic with a world of technology and innovation that looks a lot more like industrial America than feudal Europe. In addition to this, the feeling of noir melodrama and intrigue is an enjoyable departure from the typical heroic highs and dungeon crawling lows of the prevalent medievalist vibes aesthetic of the more dominant settings. If you've seen League of Legends animated Netflix series Arcane, then you've kind of already been acquainted with Eberron's general vibe. The characters are gritty and complicated. The swashbuckling action is syncopated with the investigation of conspiracy. And the morals are as gray as the black and white color palette of movies like Casablanca or Angels with Filthy Souls, if you're the cultured type. In 2024, these aspects seem almost cliche. But at the time of its publication, it was really a novel interpretation of what high fantasy storytelling could include, while still maintaining its identity as high fantasy. Today, Eberron still stands as one of D&D's flagship settings after a long process of cuts and consolidation in the IP's scope. There's a reason for that, I think. Eberron is really one of only 2 legacy settings to receive D&D publications. There are sections in certain adventure modules and source books that tell you about how you can retrofit an adventure to Greyhawk or Dark Sun. But neither of those settings have received books. But the Forgotten Realms got the Sword Coast Legends, or not Sword Coast, that's a video game. The Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. And Eberron got 2 books. The Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron and Eberron Rising from the Last War. So, yeah, really one of only 2 settings to kind of live on past 3.5, past 4th edition into 5th edition. That is until Spelljammer and Planescape got their most recent debuts. Very recent. In the era of 5th edition, WotC has prioritized really the integration of D&D with Magic the Gathering, putting a lot of time and money into creating source books for popular Magic settings like Ravnica and Theros. And let's not get things twisted. Those source books are 2 of the most interesting pieces of the 5e portfolio to date, as far as official publications by WotC are concerned. We also can't forget to mention that partnered content that's coming out with more recent settings like those of Critical Role's Exandria and Ghostfire Gaming, which you can purchase those books on D&D Beyond now, which is after being bought by Wizards of the Coast, kind of their primary distribution site for their official books. So why then, of all the many D&D settings published for the game over the many, many years that the hobby has existed, settings far more popular than Keith Baker's lucky sweepstakes entry, was Eberron chosen to be one of the 2 settings that would carry over to the earliest versions of 5th edition. Personally, I think it's because Eberron is still one of D&D's most fun, fresh, and innovative settings with great potential for campaigns and characters that not even MTG could deliver to the table. It's also as expansive a rabbit hole as any setting should be without jumping its own proverbial shark. In the next video, in this series, we'll start talking about lore in earnest, but the main takeaway here is that Eberron is not your typical fantasy setting. It is still fantasy, though, and it belongs at your table. Thanks for watching.